Choosing where to breathe is often one of the hardest decisions to make when we learn a new piece of music. It is both a physical need and a musical phrasing decision and can often change the music quite drastically depending on this. The struggle between our physical need to breathe versus the ideal musical line is critical for both music expression and for the ease of playing our parts. I believe that the objective of where to breathe, as with all other performance decisions, should be motivated by musical considerations rather than a physical need. I think it's very important to stress this attitude as this will change our approach to music interpretation. Over time, we will learn where are the best and most efficient places to breathe, but still ensure a good musical phrase. It is not always at the bar line or after every long note, okay? In this video, Chai Suang will share with you two famous excerpts from the horn repertoire.
I'm going to start with the second movement of Cappricio Espagnole by Rimsky-Korsakov. This excerpt is at the very beginning of the second movement, played by a horn quartet accompanied by lower strings. The whole atmosphere here is a little bit calmer as compared to the busy first movement. Let's start by looking through this first horn part. So there's no specific dynamic marks here stating forte of piano, but a very interesting marking which is still chain. I would analyze this as to play in a very warm tone. In big picture, I would see this as, in terms of bars, 5 plus 4 plus 4, with the first 5 bars of introduction followed by 9 bars of sort of development and 4 bars of ending phrase. So, let's start with the first 5 bars. As we can see here, there are a lot of written E, and this phrase also ends with a written E. Harmonically speaking, this is mostly in C major, written C major. As for the legato part from bar 4 to 5, I'm going to demonstrate for you the different approaches. You can either have a longer E, or you can make a little gap before the F. It's your decision, and there are a lot more approaches to this part. For me, I like to have a little gap before the legato. And bear in mind, either way you choose, the most important thing is for you to keep the intensity throughout the phrase. And if you are making a little separation and would like to have a 5-bar phrase, it is important for you to come back same or even more on the F. As for the next part, which is the 9-bar phrase, I would say that the written F is the first phrasing high point that I want to arrive. I'm going to provide you with 2 options of how are these phrases going to be played, and it relates closely to where you breathe. So I'm going to start with first one, where you breathe before the F. For this approach, I would play the first part of the phrase a bit louder than the first 5 bars, and then make a healthy tenuto attack after I breathe. For the second approach, it is about connecting the C to F without a breathing gap. So when I'm playing the first part of this phrase, in terms of dynamic, I would play same or a little bit softer than before. And then after taking the breath, we can come back to the same dynamic and start crescendo only at C to F. Again, either way you're choosing, there are 2 very important things. First, always save the crescendo until later and make a bigger crescendo to achieve a more effective change of sound. Secondly, when we are coming down in terms of pitch, like F, E, D. Naturally, it will sound like a little bit of diminuendo. So in order to make it sound sustained, we have to make an effort to do a tiny crescendo towards the E. For the last 4 bars, we are passing the melody to cello, where the upper string supports the melody and accompanied by others in the orchestra. It is the end of the phrase, but we have to also pass the written C, which is the concert F, to cello. And it's rather thick orchestration, so I would say, even though like the motif is repeated with a different note, I would play a darker tone, but not too soft, and really sustain the last note until the very last beat. So for Brahms 3, I'm going to talk briefly about the history. Van-tail horn, as known as valve horn, has been around for a while when Brahms composed this, but Brahms still preferred natural horn. And for this bit, I'm going to talk about all the long notes of these excerpts, which I highlighted. All the long notes, but the last note are actually played stop in natural horn. We all know that stop notes have this really brassy tone, but it actually sounds a little bit different with modern horn and natural horn. So you guys can go check out this recording conducted by John Elliott Gardiner on YouTube. So let's get to the music. So this phrase is at the middle of the movement and it's after a fermata. First horn has already played this melody with other instrument. And the accompaniment for this melody is generally a duplet versus triplets played by strings and chords played by winds. So it's rather complex and rich in terms of texture and chromaticism. As we can see, it's written piano espressivo here. I would say to start at a healthy, warm dynamic that can ride above all those thick accompaniment. So for the first 2 phrases, the most obvious thing is the swell. Just like what we have said in Cappricio Espagnole, we want to save the crescendo until later. So I would say we start to crescendo at second beat of the long notes, and you want to stay on the louder dynamic a little bit longer. So I would sustain the dynamic on written G for the first phrase and B flat for the second phrase. And as I mentioned earlier, when we are descending, it will sound like diminuendo already. I would just let the dynamic happen naturally because we don't want to disappear. And generally, it is important for us to speak the shorter notes. They are as equally important as the long notes. Because if you don't, we hear a very vague line of the music might be, what the music might be, and it won't sound as convincing. So the next 3 bars, we don't have anything dynamically written here. So I would say play at a comfortable dynamic and try to sustain as much as possible. And I will try to play through 2 bars without breathing and take a fairly healthy and full breath after written E flat because we have a long phrase ahead. And then here, this is a very typical case of the highest note is not always the highest point of the phrase. So we really want to aim to the written D, and I think even the beginning of written G. We have to sustain the dynamic, and for long phrases like this, it is even more important for us to start the crescendo later. last two bars, I would start my crescendo only at written D and arrive at G with a healthy forte for 2 beats. And of course, that is such a long phrase, and this is one of the other options that we can do, which is add a breath after written D. There are a lot more options where you can breathe, you can always explore on your own, and the most important thing is to make it sound convincing. Thank you.